Good evening. So, me and Dave Stitt are doing a study on the characters of Jacob and Joseph. He did Jacob, so I will be doing Joseph. So, today we're just going to kind of look at an overview of the character that Joseph had. And of course, I want us to look at the examples we can take from his life and the way that he handled different situations and the way that he lived, as how we as Christians need to be, what we can learn from that in reality. So, I'm not going to do the full lengthy reading in Genesis 37, but when we think about patriarchs in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, there's several that come to mind. Of course, one for me would be Abraham, the man of faith, and I think that's something that a lot of people would say comes to mind, or that's the person that a lot of minds go to. Of course, we have Isaac, the son of promise that Abraham had in his old age. And then we have Jacob, of course, who was the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, because his name was later changed to Israel. But please consider, as I never really had much in the past, but please consider that Joseph needs to be in this area as well. He needs to be considered as one of those patriarchs. And there's more space in Genesis devoted to Joseph than any of the others. So that's something pointed out, that this is very important, that we need to really look at the story of Joseph and figure out what we can learn from his life. And that's what me and Dave talked about when we were putting these classes together, is that we want to have real life application and look at these two men's lives and see what we can learn from them. And so the character of Joseph is, of course, worthy, and we need to have careful study of it. We really need to make sure that that's what we're looking at his character and learning something from it and studying it deeper. I looked at this, all of us have looked at the story of Jacob and Joseph as kids, in the coat of many colors, and his brothers selling him into slavery and all these things. But when we're looking at it, at least for myself, I haven't looked at it in many years. And looking at it now, it gives you a complete different light on the story. It's not just a story. There's so much we can learn from what is showed here. So we can learn from his nobility, the nobility of character that he had, his purity of heart, and his pure life, and his generosity as both a ruler and as a brother. He was very generous to those people that were underneath him, and he was very generous and forgiving, that we will be digging quite a bit deeper into later, of his brothers. So this all makes him, more than any other in the Old Testament, any other Old Testament characters, an illustration of the type of man which Christ was to give to the world in perfection. So we can learn so much from what Joseph's life is. So let's review the life of Joseph. We'll kind of, again, this is the first week, so we'll just kind of go over just basic things of what his life was, and take a quick peek at the things that we can learn. And we need to be reminded of the wonderful character displayed by this man of God. So we first start with Joseph as a son in Canaan. Joseph was hated by his brothers. We all know that. In Genesis, the 37th chapter and verse 2, it says, "This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father." So this didn't help. This didn't help Joseph's relationship with his brothers whenever he's going and telling on them. He's bringing a bad report to his father about what his brothers are doing, or what they're not doing maybe. So he's telling on them. That didn't help the situation, that they weren't very fond of him. This is something that adds to it. And going deeper into that discussion in verses 3 and 4 of the same opening in Genesis 37, "Now Israel," that is Jacob, "loved Joseph more than all of his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that his father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him." They didn't even want to talk to him. They couldn't talk to him peaceably. They couldn't have a nice thing to say about him. And of course, this angered them even more, that their father was showing so much favoritism to Joseph. So this didn't help. Again, this didn't help in the way that his brothers felt about him. And then we go even deeper into verses 5 through 11. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So we're told, this is the third time already that we're told that his brothers hate him. So he said to them, please hear this dream that I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf rose and also stood upright. And indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. So again, we're showed that they hated him. They despised their brother Joseph. They did not like him. Then he dreamed still another dream and took it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept this matter in mind. So Jacob takes this in mind and keeps that in mind and is thinking about different things, of course, and taking what Joseph's saying in. And that could be chalked up to the fact of, how Joseph was his favorite. Maybe that's the only reason he's, keeping this in mind and taking into account what Joseph is saying. And we know that, and if you haven't familiarized yourself with the story, I would encourage you to. But then we eventually know that Joseph is sold into slavery. His brothers cast him into a pit where we read later that there's no water, and he has two brothers kind of stick up for him, I guess you would say, and they wanted to kill him, but they decided not to kill him because it didn't have any profit in it, so they sell him into slavery. So they eventually sold him into slavery in Genesis 37, 12 through 36, and for sake of time, I'm not going to read that. But if you'll go to Genesis 37, verses 21 through 27, it reads, but Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand upon him, that he might deliver him out of our hands, and bring him back to his father. So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill him, if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother and our flesh, and his brothers listened. So Judah saves him. Judah and Reuben really save him from being killed. But he's eventually sold into slavery. So they was spared initially by Reuben, who intended to free him, and it is what we're told, and send him back to his father. But then he is spared death by Judah, who suggests that they just simply sell him into slavery because there's profit in that. Now we can make some money, we can get something out of it, rather than not just getting rid of our brother, but now we can make some profit in it. So, simply said, Joseph was not liked by his brothers. But Joseph was also faithful to his father. Some children rebel against their parents to win the approval of their siblings and or other friends. We've probably been in this boat at some point in our lives when we rebel against our parents. And maybe it was to, I wrote down to be cool. I don't know if we use cool anymore, but maybe it was to be cool in front of a friend or maybe one of your siblings and rebel against your parents. And in Genesis 37 and verse 13, it says, and Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding a flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to him, Joseph saying to his father Jacob, here I am. Send me. He says it very simply. I'm faithful to you, Father. Whatever you say, I will do. So I think that that's something we definitely can learn with our relationship with our God, with our Father, that we need to have this kind of faithfulness that Joseph had to his father. And we will, again, in weeks to come, we will dig deeper into the faithfulness that Joseph showed. Anyway, but Joseph remained faithful to his father, willing to obey any wish that he had. He simply says, here I am. Whatever it is that you want, here I am. I will go, I will do, I will obey you and be faithful to you. One might think that such ill treatment, followed by the separation of country and kin, we think about this, that not just at a young age was Joseph sold into slavery, but he was also separated from his family, and he was separated from the country that he grew up in, his home. He's separated from both. So, followed by the separation of country and kin, we would think that it would produce bitterness and hopelessness in such a young person, in such an impressionable person. Yet the character of Joseph that we're talking about really shines when we consider a few things. When we consider Joseph as a slave in Egypt, he becomes overseer in Potiphar's house in Genesis, the 39th chapter, and beginning in verse 1 and going through verse 6. It says, Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he did he put under his authority. So it was, from the time that he had made him overseer of his house, and all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's household for Joseph's sake, and the blessings of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread in which he ate. It says that Potiphar didn't really pay much attention to all that he had, just that he had food, because he trusted Joseph wholeheartedly. He trusted him 100% to take care of everything. And we understand that Joseph was blessed by God, and he found favor in Potiphar's eyes. And this is because of God. This is the way that God is working in his life. It says plainly that Potiphar could see the way that the Lord's working in him, and that he was a successful man, and that everything prospered with Joseph in it. So this is something that we're seeing the way that God is working in him. And do we take the time, just as a side note, do we take the time to really count our blessings and think about the blessings that God has given us and the things that we enjoy in life because of what God has done? Though a young man, he proved that he was a hard worker, that he would do whatever it took, and he proved that he was trustworthy as well, that he could be obviously trusted with all of Potiphar's everything that he had in his home and in the field. So he was taking care of everything that Potiphar had. He could be trusted with that. And he made the best of the situation. And God blessed him. And not only did God bless him, God blessed Potiphar as well for putting Joseph in this situation. So that's something we can definitely look at, the way that God's working in Joseph when he was a slave in Egypt. He's still working in him. He's still making sure that he's blessed and he's a successful person. What a wonderful thing. And we read in Genesis 39, a little bit later in the chapter, in verses 6 through 20. Again, please, take a read of that yourself. But we read that Joseph was very handsome in appearance, that he was a very good-looking man. He was tempted by Potiphar's wife, and she tried time and again to seduce him. She tried constantly to get Joseph to lay down with her, to sleep with her, and he didn't. He resisted out of the faithfulness to Potiphar and to God. In Genesis 39, 8 and 9, it says, But he refused and said to his master's wife, Look, my master does not know what it is with me in his house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in the house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So not only is he talking about, I can't do this to my master, but more importantly, how can I sin against God? I'm not going to sin against God. I'm going to keep on the straight and narrow. I'm not going to do this. And we know that what happened is that she finally ends up grabbing him and he runs. Now, there's a small lesson there in for young people. When the temptation comes for that type of stuff, what's the example that Joseph sets? He didn't walk away. He ran. He ran away. He made haste. He got out of there. So that's another lesson we can learn from the way that Joseph lived his life. And she, of course, was turned down and he left her. He ran away. Well, that didn't make her very happy. Potiphar's wife was not very happy at that. So, of course, spitefully, she accuses him wrongfully of sleeping with her. So, of course, this angers Joseph's master and Potiphar, and Potiphar himself. He's angered at this. So, if you'll remember the story, this results in Joseph being thrown in prison. So, again, God being at work in his life, Joseph goes to prison. But then Joseph becomes the overseer of that prison. In Genesis, the 39th chapter, in verse 21 through 23, it says, "But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper." Again, the Lord working in Joseph's life. He is sold into slavery. He becomes head of Potiphar, who is the captain of the guard. He's the head of security for Pharaoh. This is a very powerful man. Joseph becomes his right-hand man, if you will, and taking care of everything. And then he becomes falsely accused and thrown into prison. And then God working again in his life, he is put in command of everything that is in that prison. And it says that the prison keeper didn't really take into account a whole lot of what was going on, because he trusted Joseph. Again, going back to the trustworthiness that Joseph had, but that anything that was under his authority, he didn't pay a whole lot of attention to, because God was with Joseph. And whatever Joseph did, it prospered because of God. So, blessed by God, Joseph is favored by the prison guard, or the keeper of the prison, excuse me. He's placed in charge of the other prisoners with complete trust. He trusted him 100%. He didn't worry about anything. We're told as much in Genesis 39. He prospered in his new role, and the reason that he prospered in that role is because of God. And we will get into that he always gives God the credit. And then we get to the next part of our story. He is the interpreter of dreams. We know about his dream when he was a young man, and very much upset his brothers, and his father was not super happy about it as well, I would say. But he's the interpreter of dreams, but he is forgotten, but then he's remembered. In Genesis, the 40th chapter, if you'll go through verses 1 through 41, and again, for sake of time, I'm not going to read that. But he interprets the dreams of the butler and the baker. And he tells them exactly what those dreams are representing, and what's actually going to happen to those two gentlemen. And in chapter 40 and verse 8, "And they said to him, we each had a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. So Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please." So he's saying, look, I can help you interpret your dreams, but it's not me, it's God. Don't the interpretations belong to God? Isn't it God that's going to show you what those interpretations are? So he gives the credit back to God where it is due. So he acknowledges God to be the interpreter. And the dreams were fulfilled in Genesis, the 40th chapter, verses 20 through 23. "Now it came to pass on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he had a feast for all his servants. And he lifted up his head he lifted up the head of the chief butler and the chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So he is in prison, and he interprets these dreams and helps these two men out, and he even tells as much, please don't forget me. Don't forget that I'm here. And yet, it says in verse 23, the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but he forgot him. So Joseph is forgotten. But then he interprets Pharaoh's dream. And that's where that story is that he, Pharaoh has a dream, and the butler hears of this, and Pharaoh's trying to figure out what it means, and he says, oh, wait, I remember a guy. I remember a guy that helped me interpret a dream. This is who it is. And then Joseph gets to come out and interprets the dream of Pharaoh. Again, he's acknowledging that God provided the answer in chapter 41, verses 16, 25, and 32. But he offering advice in regards to the dreams and the fulfillment of those dreams in Genesis 41, 33 through 36. It says, now therefore, let Pharaoh select and discern a wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of those years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. So he's showing and giving advice on what to do after he interprets this dream and says, look, there's going to be 7 good years of 7 years of plenty, but that's going to be followed by 7 years of famine. So we need to plan ahead. We need to figure out, we need to put somebody in charge and figure out what we need to do. So, just recapping a little bit here. Joseph was falsely accused. Then he's forgotten by man. And many of us might wonder, why even bother being righteous? Why even bother trying to do anything good? Because I was falsely accused. I didn't do what they said I was going to do, and I was thrown into prison for it. And then whenever I get to prison, I'm put in charge of everything, and I help 2 people interpret dreams that are going to be very crucial to their lives. And I tell them not to forget me, and they forget me. But Joseph maintained his integrity and was not forgotten by God. And that's the most important part of it. God was still at work in his life, and he was not forgotten by God, just like none of us are forgotten by God. Just as he found favor in the eyes of Potiphar and the keeper of prison, so he enjoyed favor in the eyes of Pharaoh. So now let's look at Joseph as a prince in Egypt. He was wise in his service to Pharaoh. At the age of 30, Joseph was exalted to rule over all of Egypt. Can you imagine the trust that Pharaoh had in him to set him over all of that, and the ability that Joseph had because of God, that he showed many a time that's where it came from, but the ability that he had to rule, to help people out, and to serve at the age of 30, at a very young age. And his wisdom is shown in how he ruled Egypt. And in the way that he ruled, he showed much wisdom in what he was doing, showing foresight during the years of plenty, in chapter 41, verses 47 through 49, and showing shrewdness during the years of famine. Hey, let's set this stuff aside. Since we have these 7 years of plenty, let's set some of that aside, because we're going to be followed by the 7 years of famine. And let's make sure that we're being shrewd, if you will, in the way that we use that. Let's not take too much of it. Let's use it little by little. And let's figure out how to do this so that we can make sure that we get through and have enough food and have enough means to get through these 7 years of famine. Genesis 41:50 through 52. It says, "And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, whom Anseth, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called it Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction." My point here is that he was wise in his service to Pharaoh, but he's still mindful of God's blessing. He names his children as much. He names it first Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and on all of my father's household. But for God, that's why I named him that way. And then he says in the second one that Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. He begins both the same way. He names his children because he was mindful of the blessing that God has given him and God has been in his life. He was merciful in his treatment of his brethren. So as the Prince of Egypt, he shows a lot of mercy in the treatment that he has of his brethren. Finally reunited with his brothers and with his father. He arranged for them to live in Goshen. He arranged with Pharaoh that they would have a spot to live so they didn't go all the way back to their land, so that they could be there and have some of that, the food and means that they had stocked up. And he's merciful in reassuring his brothers that he had forgiven them. And this is something we'll talk about, is forgiveness that Joseph showed. In Genesis, the 45th chapter, verses 4 through 8, it says, "And Joseph said to his brothers, 'Please come near to me.' So they came near. Then he said to them, 'I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold to Egypt. But now, do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God has sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me father to Pharaoh, and the Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout the land of Egypt.'" So when he first revealed himself to his brothers, he shows that mercy. And he shows his forgiveness. He says, "Whom you sold into Egypt, you sold me into slavery. But don't be grieved and don't be angry with yourselves, because God is at work here. God had a plan for me, and this is what the plan was. I was going to come here, and I was going to help figure out all these different things that we needed to for these the time of famine. And I'm over all of the house of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh trusts me with everything, and I'm a ruler throughout the land of Egypt." God had a plan, and don't be mad at yourself. So he's showing his forgiveness there. And in chapter 50, in verses 15 through 21, it says, "When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, 'Perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for the evil in which we did to him.' So they sent a messenger to Joseph, saying, 'Before your father died, he commanded, saying, Thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, and they did evil to you. For now, please forgive the trespasses of the servants of God your father.' And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face. And they said, 'Behold, we are your servants.' Joseph said to them, 'Do not be afraid, for I am in the place of God. But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and for your little ones. And he comforted them, and spoke kindly to them. Even after their father dies, he still shows his forgiveness. Don't be afraid. Don't worry about these things. I'm still going to provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them. So Joseph is showing so much mercy here. And I just have a quick note here. And we think about this in our daily lives, one of those real life applications that we were talking about. That we look at the forgiveness that Joseph has for his brothers and the genuine forgiveness that he has and that he shows, and the fact that he forgives them for selling him into slavery. They weren't just mean to him. They didn't just talk bad to him. They didn't just, beat him up every now and then like siblings do, right? But they sold him into slavery. They told his father that he was dead, that he was killed by an animal. And he shows genuine forgiveness and genuine mercy. And we can't forgive, insert name here, whomever it is, for doing whatever it was that they have done. And then we think about the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, not to get too far off, but the sacrifice that Jesus Christ gave for each and every one of us, and we still hold grudges against people for doing some minute little thing. We need to strongly consider and really think deeply about those things that we hold against other people when we see examples like that of Joseph and the forgiveness and mercy that he extended to his brothers and what they did to him. This is something we need to strongly consider. So, Joseph also believed in the providence of God. In Genesis, the 50th chapter, in verse 20, it says, and this is what we just read, but as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. God meant it. He believed that God could make good things out of evil intentions, and that's exactly what happened. He made good things out of evil intentions, that God would keep his promises that God made to his people. In Genesis, the 50th chapter, verses 24 and 25. Don't have that one on my PowerPoint, so bear with me here. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from there. God kept his promises to his people. Joseph knew this and believed in the providence of God, and that God kept his word. So, in ending this, I want you to think in the life and story of Joseph. We see a value of character that was centered in faith and trusted in God wholeheartedly. He was devoted to serve God and man, so he served his masters well because of God, with honor and with dependability and with trustworthiness, unwilling to be deterred by the hatred, betrayal, and forgetfulness of other people, the hatred that his brothers had, and that he had been betrayed and falsely accused, and that he'd been imprisoned and forgotten about. Willing to forgive the wrongs that were committed by other people. Again, I think that's something that each and every one of us need to work on in our lives, that we need to make sure we forgive people, just as we've been forgiven ourselves. He was able to see the big picture, that God's wonderful workings in the affairs of men, that he looked at what God was working and looked at the big picture that had been painted, as we need to as well. And sometimes it's very hard to see. Sometimes it's very hard to take a step back and really look at the big picture of things and see what's being worked through and what's going on. This noble character, Joseph, can be useful in all seasons of life. And I want you to understand that. This is just food for thought for this week. As a youth, he was tempted and tried with no help from family or friend. He had to get it done himself and with God. And that's what he did. He leaned upon God to get him through those times. As a mature individual, he was charged with important responsibilities, as each and every one of us as adults are. We are in charge of our families, and we are dependent on for various different things in our lives and the jobs that we carry. So we can learn from Joseph in being trustworthy and sacrificing and doing what we should and letting God work in our lives so that we can be prosperous, so that our employer may be prosperous as well. As we saw with Joseph and Potiphar, and with Pharaoh, and with the keeper of the prison. And as an aged person, knowing that death is imminent, that it's going to come, that it's not the enemy. So, may the character of Joseph serve to inspire us to develop our character as well. That in some small way that we can be, as discussed in 1 Timothy, the 4th chapter, in verse 12. It says, "Let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in the word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, in purity." So hopefully the character of Joseph can serve to inspire us to develop the character that he had as well, so that we can be an example to believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, and in purity. So that is the opening lesson class about Joseph. So hopefully you tune in each week to get a little bit more out of this. This has been very beneficial to me. And again, looking at this story that we know as kids, and there is just so much here that we can pull and put into our daily lives and live a life closer and a life more for God. Thank you.